Before the sermon, I want to say thank you to Eric Lipka, a former ministry colleague and friend of mine, who he's in college in Tennessee, and he went on J-term to Ghana, and he got this stole. And apparently in Ghana, the tradition is that each of these patterns means something. This one means peace and harmony, which I'm going to take as his lesson to me, that I need more peace and harmony in my life, but that's where this comes from. And so I'm thankful to Eric. This is week 3 of our series on the good news of being Presbyterian. And there are plenty of people, even in our tradition, who hear little hints about our style of faith, and they hear little stories about the history of the church, and they think it sounds like bad news. They hear that sin, this little word, big concept, is somehow pervasive in our world, and that no matter how hard we try, we just can't help but stumble into it. And they hear that God determines our salvation regardless of how hard we work, and that sounds like a rotten deal to some people. So these last couple of weeks, we've been working against that idea and redeeming those concepts and clarifying the better Presbyterian insights about those things and what they really mean about your life and why they may matter to you, and how they can be good news. A little recap. You might remember week 1 we said that recognizing God's infinite love is the real point of acknowledging the fact that we aren't perfect people. It's like when you hike up a mountain and you chose these socks that probably weren't the best idea, and they're hurting your feet, and you're tired, and you're tripping over things, and you can't find the right path, and you're carrying this huge weight and all these burdens, and you get out to this just amazing look. You can see forever. It's gorgeous, and there's mountains, and there's snow, and there's maybe a whole pile of moose down there. And what do? You have options of what to do. You can sit down and focus on your weaknesses and on your pain, and you can complain and beat yourself up for choosing those socks. Oh, why did I choose those socks? It was your fault, and you could do that. You could stay focused completely on all those problems, and there'd probably be something true about all that. Or your other option, which seems more true to me, is when you're tired and when you're hurting and because of those choices you made, you could put down that burden you carry and you could point your gaze out to something beautiful and amazing and huge in the world. And you could see it as a gift. You could say, how incredible that this little stumbling thing like me can experience something like that. How incredible that no matter what weight holds us down, we are given the joy and the responsibility to care for all of this. That's how I understand Presbyterians who are just stunned by God reaching down to messy people like us. That no matter how good you are at this journey, no matter how often you stray off the path, God is in the business of reaching down to people like us. So week 2, you might remember, we said that however it is that God reaches down to us, in many ways God might be connected in your life. I'm sure if we asked each of you, we'd have 50 different answers. But the deepest way that I understand that God works in our life is by weaving us into an ultimate plan for the world. God has this idea about how the world should go, kind of fits us in there. And even the messiest of us, even the messiest of us do incredible things in our life. We are servants, and we are kind, and we are fathers and mothers and friends. And some of us make peace, and some of us make healing, and all those things are fantastic. But the good news that Presbyterians really trumpet to the world is that our ultimate value doesn't come just in our doing those things, but it is that God weaves our destiny into a plan for the world. No matter how many mistakes we make, God redeems that. No matter how well we as a community can work that together, God can use that for something even bigger than the sum of its parts. Now, Presbyterians call that predestination because no matter who you are, God is in the business of integrating your destiny into a plan to save the world. And that sounds like good news to me. That's my spin on it. And I had this suspicion that if people really, really trusted that kind of good news, this full sense of God's grace, they would live in joy and freedom, and they would live into a full sense of worship, the most exciting part of the week, and we would do everything we could to carve out time together for fellowship. And it wouldn't just be that polite fellowship where you talk about the weather and how you drove to each other's house, but we'd be rowdy and we'd be hugging and we'd just have a good old time. And if we really trusted in God's grace, Presbyterians, they wouldn't be able to stay seated on that pew. They'd be so excited about worship. Someone give me an amen. Amen. Don't you know Presbyterians don't amen? You're supposed to sit in the pews. If any Christians are glued to their pews with their mouths shut, it's you. Yeah. You know, that's kind of what our tradition's been known for sometime. Presbyterians have been known to be staunch and pious and reserved. And you've heard him say things, well, if God's in charge of the world, we believe God's in charge of the world more than any other denomination out there. But if God's in charge of the world, well, why bother getting involved with it? So despite the good news of living into God's grace, the nickname that our tradition has earned, and we've earned it, is the frozen chosen. And over the last few hundred years, it's not unfair to say that many Presbyterians have been boring. And they've been disinclined to change or to progress, and many of them have just accepted that as our fate. We're chosen by God, and so we might as well rest, frozen in attitude and in our action. That's a fair critique, but do you think that's the end of the story? Do you think that frozen chosen really expresses the good news of our little corner of faith? Do you think this congregation could survive or thrive if we really were frozen and chosen? No. So we're going to take that on. Right away. We're going to take that on. Many people hear something like predestination, and they get kind of the right idea about grace, and they actually do understand something right about God, choosing to place our lives in this grand, holy plan. But somehow, the implication they hear is this: if God's all about grace, and our destiny or our salvation isn't measured by our own actions, then why the heck do anything? Why put in any effort to be good? Why aim our choices toward a better neighborhood? Why work to be kind or just? God's going to forgive. God will redeem. God's already destined my whole life to matter, even my mistakes, so I'm set. This attitude, some people call it fatalistic. This attitude, I'll admit it, it's kind of enticing. It's kind of enticing to sit back and let God handle everything. And I don't have to imagine some crazy scenario to explain this to you. This happens to me all the time. I have a tough choice to make, and I know what I should do. You know what you should do. You know what would be holy and just and kind, and you know what would contribute to a better world, but that other option sure looks fun. I mean, that looks tasty over there. She's really cute over there. That thing over there takes a lot of work. I think I'll just sit back over here. And frankly, even if it hurts somebody, even if it hurts me, God will wipe it clean. In fact, according to how I understand God, God's already wiped it clean, already forgiven me, and can turn this mistake into a learning experience, to an opportunity for growth. So I'm going to choose so that this can be better in the world. And nothing I can do can thwart God's plan, so no harm, no foul. And that's a good loophole for faith, isn't it? Yeah, so I might as well live just frozen. Now, how might we answer that backdoor forgiveness? Well, instead of the fatalistic sense of frozen chosen, Presbyterians who tend to be spiritually mature, they tend to understand it more this way. The natural attitude toward God's grace is a joyful response. If we really trusted in God's grace, if we really participated in God's love, we would respond with joy. And that's the way it's written in Colossians. Frank had a very slightly different translation than the one I'm going to read here, but as I hear it, it starts out, if you have been raised with Christ, then set your mind on things above, such as compassion and kindness and gentleness and forgiveness and love and peace. If you feel God's grace working in your life, that's not the end of faith. That's the beginning of discipleship. And I think Valentine's Day that we just had offers the perfect metaphor for this. And yeah, the holiday is a commercialized joke, but follow me along with this. All the loving husbands, all the loving wives, people who have partners, all of you who had anything to do with Valentine's Day or have any partner in your life, follow along with this kind of a thought, because we'll see if it's true or not. I love this person in my life. I mean, she is the best. And we had plans for a special dinner on Friday night, and I have a hint that she has something special planned for like a bottle of wine and maybe a massage. Who knows what else? I love my husband or my wife or my girlfriend or my boyfriend. I love them so much. But the Olympics are on. And I can only watch skeleton like every 4 years. And it's pretty exciting when people fall off their sled. And I see her every day. Every day. Besides, if I'm late for dinner, she'll forgive me. So maybe I'll just kind of hunker down to the TV. And on Sunday I'll come back and I'll say, my bad. And I'm sure we'll just get right back to that wine and that massage and all that other stuff. How would that go? Wouldn't go so well. No, if you care for your partner at all, you get yourself to dinner on Friday. Maybe you dress up. Maybe that's not part of your life, but maybe you do. Maybe you dress up. Maybe you have some kind of a nice conversation. You're kind to each other. You're compassionate. You laugh. You enjoy each other's company, and you grow together. You're going to make mistakes. Guys, we make mistakes all the time in this. And we forgive each other. But real love begets deeper love. And that's the Presbyterian kind of sense here. That if you really trust in God's grace, you will want to respond. If you really trust that God is in your life, the natural response, not the commandment, not the rule, not the guideline, but the natural response to God's choosing to be on your side is for you to choose to be on God's side. But do we always do that? Does the church, the universal, like when you hear the big word church around the whole world, does it sound like they're doing that? Or our denomination gets just stuck in all kinds of dumb conversations instead of responding to God's grace. And many individuals, many churches, mostly pastors, get stuck within these little walls into a routine, frozen into a status quo, frozen into an inability or an unwillingness to really feel and experience the power of God in their life. We trade joy for work. We trade community for entertainment. We trade prayer for hanging out. We trade integrated justice for good intentions. Take John Knox. After Calvin, the most important person in the early foundation of the Presbyterian Church was this Scottish guy named John Knox. Stern, domineering. He was a galley slave. He was taken captive and he was stuck in a ship for 2 years and had to row for 2 years. So you can picture this just tough guy, gnarled old man. And more than anyone, this is the guy responsible for making Scotland a Presbyterian country. Mostly because he was a fantastic preacher. I mean, this guy, he had it down. People called him a trumpeter for God, which is a pretty cool nickname in my field of work. I think that'd be awesome. Trumpeter for God. He really answered his calling. And the thing is he took on that idea of trumpeting God from the pulpit, and this is his most famous pamphlet he ever wrote. He didn't really write books, he wrote little pamphlets. And the most famous one was the first blast of the trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women. Yeah, what? How are we going to redeem this guy? He was a great preacher, but he was a huge misogynistic jerk. And he would scream at the queen. He made the queen cry at one point. He belittled women everywhere. He didn't think that they had any strength to be in power. Eventually, at his church, his grave out there, they kind of forgot where it was, and they put a parking lot over it. It's literally parking number 23 at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. So you can go and kind of stand on his grave, women, take a trip. Knox wanted to preach, and he wanted to just preach and let God handle the rest. His response wasn't empty, but it wasn't joyful, and it certainly didn't cohere with God's vision of justice. I wish I could say I was better than John Knox, which is hard. I mean, this guy's a huge figure, and maybe I am a little bit, but I'm plenty hypocritical. Maybe I know better how to use a trumpet for women's power in the world, but I have plenty of blind spots in my life. There are so many places where I could respond to God better and stronger. And I think Nederland, especially, could kind of help someone like me with my blind spots. For all the bickering and all the controversies we have in this town, and there are some bickering and there are some controversies in this town, I get the sense that Nederland is really tuned in, more than any community I've ever seen, at trying to live in community with an open spirituality alongside nature and art. I see people trying to buy local, and I see them supporting community theater. How many people, raise your hands if you were at the community theater sometime this weekend? Yeah, a bunch of us complained about that movie already. I see people passionate about all sorts of meditations and spiritual practices and exercise. How many people did yoga sometime this week? We got a couple of hands in there. I actually did. My first yoga of the year. It still kind of hurts. I see people take pride in their forests. I see people come together for neighborhood music jams with kids or with adults or on porches anywhere. And it might not much of it be in the name of Christ, but don't tell Nederland some of our neighbors who don't have anything to do with church, definitely not with the Presbyterian church, some of our neighbors are probably living out a more joyful response to God's grace than the pastor who drives out of town to ski, who always finds excuses to miss Tai Chi on Wednesday night, and who plays more online Scrabble than he has been doing growing vegetables. And I'm not saying this to beat myself up, because I do try to recognize the presence of God in my life, and I do feel very fulfilled, and I do try to respond joyfully in a lot of ways. But I know I can always work to transform myself into someone more faithful, into someone who trusts God more and responds more wholly. And that's the transformation part. That's next week's sermon, how the church continues to transform. But for all my weaknesses, all my blind spots, what I can do in my role, in my calling, is to point to good news of being Presbyterian, such as Karl Barth. Karl Barth was a German minister and theologian who understood that responding to God required risk, required sacrifice. You hear people say, well, why didn't anyone stand up to the Nazis? This is the guy who stood up. This is one of the guys who stood up. And he stood up so loudly and inspired so many other pastors to try to stand up that he had to run out of country. If he stayed, he would have been killed along with so many other people. But he came to America and used that platform as an important spiritual figure in the Reformed Church to tell other American pastors and around the world, you've got to do something about this. Why? Because God's love insists that we respond by rescuing God's children who are suffering. And what I can do in my role is to point out again that our response to God's grace should be joyful and in community and in prayer and meditation, whatever you want to call it, and with nature and wrapped up in art. And to be sure, those old dead white guys who founded what we call Presbyterian, they were serious. They didn't like music in church. They would have hated stained glass windows. But Calvin loved mountains. And Luther played guitar at home with his wife. And all of these folks appreciated art as an expression of the Spirit working through us. And especially the Presbyterians from Switzerland, they hung out in Geneva. There was a big lake. We've got a little lake. And they had big mountains. We have mountains. You can kind of picture what that would be like for them. They would complain about what we're about to do in worship. And they would come here and complain about all sorts of moral weaknesses we have in our town. But you know what they would do? Is they would come and love the view. And they would come and engage in conversation around how to live together. And they would be the first people in line if Daniel ever gave a concert here outside of worship. What I can do here is give an opportunity to respond joyfully to God, even in ways that would give those other guys a heart attack. So here's what we're going to do to close the sermon. We're going to do this through the next hymn. We're going to do this even into the offering. And we're going to do this. You're welcome to do this for the rest of the service, after service, however you want. What we're going to do as a joyful response to our trust in a God of grace is to make art together. All of you. This canvas, Katie just brought up here, has written at the top words of Colossians 3. If you have been raised with Christ. And then at the bottom of the canvas, it says, then love each other. A little paraphrase of the second part of that. On the left are the words, from frozen chosen. And on the right are the words, to a joyful response. Your opportunity as a church is to add words or images or doodles or whatever might express for you how you move in those different directions. Of course, it doesn't matter if you're any good at art. I can't draw anything. Just come on and add one line. Add your name. Add whatever you can. If you do have a gift of drawing, spend some time up here making something we can all really appreciate. But friends, this is the community of God. And just with communion, you are all invited to this table. Come express your trust in God.